Ready?
Yep, ready.
Oh, what a lovely sound. What bird was that?
I don't know. I'm not a twitcher.
Should be.
I know all the sounds, but I don't know who they are.
Well, the good news is they're here.
Yeah.
And the other good news is that we're finally seated still. Gabrielle Chan, thank you for your time. And welcome to the Regenerative Journey. And welcome to the deck
Thank you.
of your cottage.
Yeah.
Cottage beside the house.
Yeah.
In your home, just outside of Harden.
Yes.
In New South Wales.
Yes.
Southwest
Here I am.
We've had a bit of I've had a mad morning.
Both of us have had a mad day.
I'm running late. I hit some roadworks and I won't say who, but someone put some diesel in my petrol wagon.
Oh, God.
So we had it worked out. So, but here we are. I know time is limited. And Gabby, let's start by just looking out in front of us and just tell me what it means to be sitting here. Is this your happy place? Maybe not this very deck, but are you looking at something that makes you happy?
Absolutely. It makes me incredibly happy. And it makes me even more happy that I didn't expect that I would land here. Only because it just never entered my consciousness. I'm a city girl, I was born in the suburbs, and I never expected to end up on a farm. And you know, when life takes you to places that you don't expect to go, it creates a sort of amplification of the intensity, whether it's happy or sad maybe, I don't know. But certainly my experience has been happy.
I was going to say, hopefully on the, there's net happiness there.
Absolutely. There's more than net happiness.
Do you want to explain net happiness by looking out there? I mean, there's some amazing exotic introduced species trees. This is a pretty established kind of garden, isn't it? It's been here for a bit.
It is. My mother-in-law was a keen gardener, and this is the kind of bones of it, because she had lots of garden beds, and she won prizes for her garden, and I'm just like not even a gardener's bootlace. So the trees are left, and one of her signatures were the black ironbarks you can see. And they go all the way up the driveway, and we've planted a few more, and they're just gorgeous. I just love the black trunks of them. And then there's exotic trees as well. There's the old oleander. The kids call him Frank.
This one
I
here.
don't know why.
That is the biggest oleander I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's massive.
It's enormous.
Yeah.
Don't stir your soup with a branch.
I know
the
my
highly.
husband's always accusing me of possibly stirring his tea with a leaf.
I hope
There
I
was a
haven't given you an
case
idea.
Yeah, there was a case where a woman did that.
On purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I'm just stirring with a stick. I had a story where a guy went camping with some people, and he did just that. He was stirring some soup or stew on the stove, just did no idea, and stirred it, and of course, bingo, they're all feet up. But anyway, no, we
won't do that.
No. Well, I know not to accept a cup of tea from you next time. If we even get through this, and there is a next time.
Yeah.
And beautiful, you've got some beautiful desert ash down there.
Yeah.
And not Lebanon cedar. Are they Lebanon cedar?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So let's go back in time, if we may, this podcast is called The Regenerative Journey, and it's about understanding the tips and tricks and tension events and moments in time that are significant for you, and sort of understanding, our listeners, for them to take some gold, dig some nuggets up, and take them home. Where do you want to start? I mean, how far back do you want to go? Were there some significant childhood moments that may have sort of steered you to where you are now?
Not really.
Take us back to Sydney. No, there's nothing. Let's just jump to,
No.
You're in Sydney, though.
I was in Sydney, and I went into the media, and I went into politics, And then I meet this.
You were a child for a while, huh?
I was a child. I was a child.
You've gone straight
It's
to.
true.
Did you go to school?
I did go to school. I was a child, but I had no connection to place. And I think that's the thing that this place has taught me, is that connection to place is really important. I was raised as a kind of global citizen. My dad is Chinese Singaporean. We were raised to be educated and be comfortable wherever we were in the world. And I think my political, my career as a political journalist taught me that there were some people who were connected to place and some people that were global citizens. And there are some people who are both, of course. But I think that connection to place became a really important understanding for me, not only in my political reporting, but in my understanding of landscape and communities. And I didn't have that in the city, and I have that now where we are, and that was, I think that's a real gift.
Is it a thing? Does that happen because one lives in the city, or is it more of a personal, family, cultural thing? Is it a general thing, or was it just your circumstance?
I think it's partly my circumstance. I think people do, if they're in the city and have lived in a community for a long time, or deliberately go out and make community connections. Absolutely, they are connected to place. But part of this was a sort of aspirational, I think, aspirational journey of a migrant family where education was really important, getting ahead was really important, and so that stuff about community was not so important. And because as a child you don't know how different your childhood is to everyone else, because you always think your childhood is normal. I can't contrast it with anyone else's, really.
And how was nature there somewhere? Was there trips into, what you would call nature, or that kind of environment for any particular reason? There
was my childhood from probably first class onwards was spent in a newly developed suburb called Belrose, and the house backed onto bush, and as kids we spent all our time in the bush, catching tadpoles, running around, running loose, getting around in rainwater, storm drains, and doing all those dangerous things that you're not supposed to do.
But that's kind of not dissimilar to,
Yeah, being out here. Yeah.
Open space, nature, trees, dirt, water.
We had bushfires that came up to the back fence, that was a scary time. And so there was a sense of nature from that time, I guess from 6 or 7 onwards. But it wasn't something, it was something I was drawn to as a kid, but wasn't something I took with me as I got older and turned into a horrible teenager and went into a career in the media.
What the horrible teenager bit, was that is that a particular Gabby thing, or is that just,
I've got a terrible case of oppositional defiance disorder.
Explain that. As in,
my husband
I haven't heard that one before. That's a.
So if someone, if someone tells you no,
crash.
then I'll have to do it. Or if someone tells me this is the case, I'll have to find a reason why it's not the case. And I think a lot of journalists have that, propensity to push for weaknesses in any statement system. And, that's essentially the book. It's just like, what are the weaknesses in this thing we call farming? Why do we do things the way we do? How does that happen? What culture is that? And that's all my oppositional defiance disorder.
Is there curiosity in there, or is it sort of not curiosity? Because for me, curiosity is kind of a positive thing. Was it curiosity, or was it like, I'm actually just going to press some buttons and get some people cranky?
Totally curiosity. So I want to, in order to understand something, I want to be able to unpack it and put it together, like an engine or anything that you're curious about the way it works. So does this system, whether it's an economic system or a farming system or a social system, does it stand pulling apart and shaking upside down and then putting back together? Like, would you put it back together in the same way as you found it?
Before we get to the book, so you were a horrible teenager, and then your words, not mine, and then you were finished school. You said before you mentioned got into media. Yep,
went to
why?
Curiosity, I think, and good luck, and started as a copy girl at News Limited, and got a cadetship on the Australian, and did my media training there. Spent some time on the Telegraph.
Telly. What were you doing on the Telly?
I was medical reporter.
Really?
At the Telly, yeah. And I did all sorts of things, general features. You have to do everything, when you're a young journo. And I got sent to Hong Kong to the South China Morning Post for a couple of months. So that was pretty interesting for me, particularly as someone with Chinese heritage going there. I think they joked at the time it was sending coal to Newcastle.
But, I mean, was that something you chose to do, or they just made some big assumption there, or what?
No. It was a prize for... I've forgotten what it was. I think it was a Cadet of the Year or something like that.
You remember what that was.
No. It was like, I can't remember whether it was a yearly thing or whether it was the whole cadetship thing. But anyway, it was a prize of sorts. And
you'd done something good.
Yeah, it just happened to be me.
And so, how long were you in that world, in that particular kind of media environment? I mean, not that you've ever really stepped out of it, but what was the next sort of chapter there?
So from there, I worked at the Telly for a couple of years, and then I decided to go overseas, and I went to New York and worked in New York for a while at the Canadian Consulate, of all places, doing arts promotion. That was for a year, and then I came back and went back to... Where did I go from there? I worked as a press secretary for a little while for a Liberal state minister, Peter Collins. He was arts minister and treasurer at the time. And after that I went back into the media, went back to the Oz, and one fateful night met a farmer.
Now you refer to that farmer as the farmer. And it took me a while to actually I had to introduce myself to the farmer to then know his name, because I couldn't find much reference to the farmer's real name. Are we allowed to even say his real name? Was that like a secret?
No, it's like 007.
Well, he looks a bit like 007. In his work gear.
No.
I thought he was going to pull out a little, piece and do me in there for a second.
No.
Who are you?
That was about, when you have separate careers as partners or married couples, and you choose this kind of occupation that really the other person hasn't chosen. And that's me writing about stuff related to the farmer's life, and he is just a poor bastard that has to go along with it. And so I have to protect, I wanted to separate, what he does and what I do, and it's so that it's not reflected back on him. My madness is not reflected back on him, I guess.
And so when you talk about the farmer, is it more, not, is it a bit less personal and more sort of generic, as in, you know, a typical farmer, whatever that is?
I
mean, what is a
thought,
typical farmer?
do you know, like
No.
you know more than anyone that what is a typical farmer?
Well, you can pigeonhole farmers pretty easily, and there's different pigeonholes, not the same one,
Yeah.
because there's so many. And I think that the not the industry, I don't know what to call it industry, the career path, the vocation of farming attracts interesting people, and it is hard to pin. You know, it's easy for people to pigeonhole them, I think, but really, if you dig into it, they're very unique, and thankfully they're very unique because they're all living in unique environments, and if they were all the same, then they wouldn't. You know, only 1 in 10 would actually fit in their environment, I think.
Yeah, definitely true, and quite contradictory in a lot of ways. Quite unique thinkers, but also quite aware of, you know, well, in some cases, conforming or conservative.
Expectation.
Expectation, you know, local culture, all of these things I think play into the way a farmer relates to both the land and the people around him. And family culture too.
So family?
Family
totally.
culture.
And that's something you can't, I mean, I think it's harder to escape a family culture in the country, maybe. Not that I've, you know, lived with a family in the city to compare, but my sense is, whilst there's open spaces that you think you could run away into, there's a sense of isolation. And I mean, I guess, you know, marrying into a farming family, how was that?
Well,
can we talk about that? Is that a secret?
Not really a secret. I can't talk about it a lot.
You can write about it, but you can't talk about it.
No, I mean, it's different here because the family wasn't here. Like, I'm conscious that a lot of people have a different experience where they move. They are the wicked or not daughter-in-law that moves into a family culture that has extended family around them. I didn't have my extended family around me, so I'm conscious that might be different to moving into, say, a multi-generational farming family that is more common or that you hear about more often. But yeah, definitely like completely different family cultures, completely different. And, you know, I think that happens with lots of partnerships and marriages, doesn't it?
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, look, you know, I've only been in one marriage, one partnership, like, well, proper one. So I can't compare either. But yeah, look, everything is unique, and I think, and I have lots of friends who have, you know, had, you know, wives, got married, and wives have come into those situations, their family situations, fairly hardcore multi-generational stuff, and friends who have married into that, and it can be very challenging. You know, it seems, I don't know, more often than not, it is more challenging than not. You know, that especially if that person who's moved in has not had the foundation or the grounding or they just don't understand how we do it in the country. You know, that's a real thing.
Yeah.
But you didn't necessarily have that to do with.
Well, I didn't, but having said that, like my first book, Rusted Off, which was about the political disruption in rural seats, I'm sure a lot of people looked at that and said, what would you know about the country?
Did they?
Yeah, I think so.
And you said, shut up, read the book?
Well, no, I mean, you know country culture, Charlie, better than anyone. No one actually said it to me.
No, but I would suggest, though, you having, I mean, this is the thing about whether you're, you know, marrying into a farming family or you are a new farmer to the rural scene, you're not bringing paradigms with it, you know. So you came to the whole situation with a fresh pair of eyes and probably saw it for what it was. Well,
yeah, or not. You know, I had a particular view, which I was prepared to write down, which was, you know, like pretty scary to be able to write about your local community and have it live on a page and without being able to change anything after the fact. So there was that, but I guess I was naive enough to think that it might add something to the debate, the political debate, particularly at that time.
And how did it go down with the local community, can I ask?
I think it was okay.
You're still here.
I'm still here, and people said they liked it, but
Hey,
again,
there's the farmer.
I wouldn't have. I wouldn't have heard about it necessarily if they didn't like it. You know, they wouldn't have said it to me.
No, well, I didn't get any bad feedback, so I think you're pretty right. So tell me, let's get to the book. I'm conscious of time. The farmers just walked behind us. I just got a drop of rain, did I?
Yeah.
The farmer's just walked behind us with his towel and dungarees there. So I think you've got to go. You're going somewhere at some point. So let's get to the book. I'm not allowed to swear, but you are.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us the name of the book?
The name of the book is Why You Should Give a Fuck About Farming.
How rude.
I know, it is rude, isn't it?
I saw that and I just loved it. I think it's the most appropriate. Why should we?
Because farming and landscape management is exposed to all of the world's existential problems. That is climate change, soil loss, water shortages, pandemics and zoonotic diseases, natural disasters, political disruption. Like, farming is exposed, I would argue, like no other industry. And we often in Australia, even though we have this kind of white settler economy that rode on the sheep's back, we think we've got the food and farming problem fixed because we've been doing it here for a long time, and it's such an important part of our mythos. But in a lot of ways, and in the political debate that I was seeing, people consider it as this kind of quaint cottage industry that wasn't too important. It was just like, oh, it's 2.5% of GDP, and you know, it employs 320,000 people, and that's not much in the grand scheme of things when you compare it to, say, education or tourism or any of those other industries. But it is at the heart of how we go forward as a nation, how we manage the continent, and how we feed ourselves. And that plays into health, it plays into communities, plays into all sorts of things that I think makes it really important and worth thinking about deeply.
Was there a catalytic event, tension event, something that happened that you went, I've got to write this book, or someone should write this book, or there's a whole lot that needs to be identified here? Or was it just like was it like a slow release drip and suddenly you went, oh?
So after I wrote the first book, Rusted Off, in 2018, it had one chapter on agriculture. And that chapter covered just like three things: climate change, land use, and kind of political frustration with regulation and the way farming is seen in the political debate. And then I went back to my regular reporting, and I was reporting in areas around federal and state elections where people were increasingly cranky, farmers were increasingly cranky about what they saw as a playing field that was nowhere near level. So the economic model, they felt squeezed by that economic model, and they felt squeezed by global forces. And I thought, why has this economic farming model developed? And does it serve us for the next couple of decades as we're going into a changing climate, as we're seeing all these issues develop on our landscape, as we're seeing issues develop in our food supply, not just in the health of the food, but also in the supply chains that deliver the food. We have all these sort of elements in this farming system that don't really, they've just kind of landed us here in this place. And if we thought about them again, would we still do the same thing?
Is that economic model working? Like what did you do in your research? I mean, what is, I guess there's a lot of different versions of that economic model and what's the definition of working. But in your view, does it need to change? Can it change?
I think it needs to change because I think we value we only value part of the chain, right? So my contention is that basically the only way that farmers can get a pay rise right now is to increase their yield, largely. They're commodity growers, a lot of family farmers, which the political system says every drought that they value the mum and dad farmers, they value the family businesses, that those families that are largely in the middle of very large companies or very small companies are hollowing out. That's what I think. And, there are a lot of people there are a number of people in the book who back that up, who do, agricultural research for a living. And so if that hollowing out is happening, where does that land us in a decade or two's time? Like, does that land us in a landscape where, there are fewer, larger farming companies that control more of the landscape? If that's the case, how they manage that landscape is really important to us as a nation, not only for us as a society, but for our environment and for our food supply. And is that what we want? And some people might say yes, because I want dollar milk, I want the cheapest product I can get, I just want cheap mince, cheap pasta, all the stuff that ran off the shelves when lockdown happened. And if that's the case, like I'm 55, I worry about my kids and my grandkids, but, if that's what Australia decides, go for it. But I just think I wouldn't like to see that outcome.
That makes me think about a Joel Salton quote, which is wonderful, where he says, we have a choice as eaters, either pay the farmer now or the doctor later. And that's kind of the way I look at that. We do have a choice, don't we?
We do. And the other thing that I would say in that vein about the economic model is that, this whole deregulation arc started from the time I was a baby journalist in the 80s watching the Hawke Keating government, and they stripped away a lot of the protections of agriculture that made it a very uncompetitive industry. And there were some good things that happened then. People needed to shake down, businesses needed to get more efficient, but in that arc, I think competition policy that was supposed to increase competition actually decreased competition. And we see that playing out now. The number of businesses, farming businesses dropping, we're all told get big or get out. That scale story has underlied basically productivity in Australian farming in the last couple of decades. And that productivity now is flatlining. And why is that flatlining? Because people are starting to think about their natural capital, how much ground cover have you got? How much soil organic carbon have you got? Are your waterways clean? How are you thinking about your landscape? And that is happening because we don't value that stuff.
Well, I guess it's, we're so used to valuing things dollars and cents
Yeah.
on a balance sheet, aren't we? And then there's this whole new natural capital accounting, which is, I guess, embryonic in some ways, but really important, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, it is. And, you can argue it both ways, because natural capital accounting is essentially putting a scientific measure on everything in your ecosystem. So, the quality of your water, the number of species on your land, how much of your soil is covered, how many trees you've got, all of those things. And so there's that scientific measure, right? So no one argues with that. What people argue with in developing a system that puts that into your books the way you have a tractor on your books or a shed on your books is whether you can put a dollar value on that. So can you put a dollar value on how many trees you have on your farm, and then what does it mean if someone comes along and says, okay, I'll cut down all those trees and we'll grow new trees, 200 k's away, different species. Like, there's lots of bigger. It's a very kind of controversial topic.
It is. It's complex, and I think that some elements of it are just not kosher. Like, I have a bit of a problem with the whole offset thing. The corporates can go, oh, okay, that's cool, I can keep emitting if I plant some trees in India. And that's another, I've mentioned a number of times, in Australia, there are businesses that bang on about how wonderful their carbon sort of benchmark, not so much benchmarks, their net zero, what is it? I always get mixed up
with neutral.
Carbon neutral or carbon negative. Was it carbon positive? Carbon negative. And I go, wow, that's cool. So they must be planting trees, and sort of that's all part of the auditing. I go, no, they're planting trees in India. It's like, but you're on a farm. Like, you're one of the few businesses or industries where you can actually directly impact on farm in two ways. Or a number of different ways. And that, to me, and look, it's a start, and it's fine, and it gets people having that conversation, and I think there's the positive way to look at it is that if those businesses, and I think that is actually happening, they've gone in going, beauty, we can offset our crimes, and then they actually understand there's actually more to it, and that they sort of it's a foot in the door, and if it's a foot in the door, then maybe that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about it is it makes people think about what they value, because at the moment the message that we get is that all of these trees are worth nothing. Like, they have zero, so you can knock one over with a bulldozer and that's zero value. Obviously they do have a value, but how you value them is a big question. But I think even getting people to think about, we value a $2 t-shirt from Woolies. Why do we value it at $2 if you don't value what that tree's worth? Like, it's an important conversation starter, I think, to get people thinking about what's important in the world and what we can't live without.
And I think banks are looking at that.
Definitely.
Green loans, and I think there'll be some competition, I trust, between the big banks and the smaller banks and the community banks, because I think and I hope that's a sincere interest. I mean, look, their bread and butter is making money. That's their bag. But I think it can be done in a way that is really positive, I trust.
Yeah, there's a lot of scepticism, I have to say, in farming, in sections of the farming industry about how it will roll out and whether it becomes another vehicle for ticket clipping on the way through. On farm businesses, and I think some of those fears are legitimate, and you're starting to see these kind of carbon aggregators come out that say, I can sell you, Charlie, I'll manage your carbon account for you, and I'll take 20 to 40% along the way, and you can have the rest. And you're signing up to things that maybe you're not clear on what they are and what they mean long term down the track. So I think there are a lot of potholes. Yeah,
and that's another conversation, about, sovereignty, and I'm just a bit sus on the fine print, if there is even fine print, and what that means, and how long really are you connected with those providers or those agents, and who are they connected to that you somehow, there's, taking that to the nth degree is like, well, could someone I don't even know who's not on this contract basically pitch up to my place because I've signed a contract and say, you know what, we actually own your land because, you sort of sold us the carbon and we've got our foot in the door, but, we can actually choose what to do here now, which is all a bit scary. Maybe that's another conversation at the time.
It's such a big conversation, and it's happening now in the political debate just this week about how soil and carbon farming is going to be a big kind of source of, or a big carbon sink going forward. So yeah, it's one you're going to have lots of conversations on, I suspect, in the future.
Well, I remember going to the Young S&C Club in about 2006 or 7, and they had a carbon trading, carbon farming meeting, conference, whatever it is, workshop there. That was the first time I remember going to a group of people to talk about that, and I just went, oh my God, that's got hairs on it. And ever since then, like, I don't know how many years that is now, ago, 15, 14, I've just gone, more agents coming in, more platforms. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's just, I don't know, just haven't had the cojones to step in there just yet, looking for the right opening.
There's a pretty interesting model out at the moment called the Farmers Mutual by a guy called Andrew Ward.
Oh yeah, Andy Ward.
Andrew?
I owe him a phone call. Andrew, I'm sorry, I owe you a phone call. Yeah, he's doing something with Young Farmers Connect. Oh, is it today? I did a post on it. Was it today, tomorrow?
So,
Maybe tonight.
Yeah, but that mutual model, I think, is an interesting model because it sort of goes back to the old. I mean, it's wrong, the wrong language to call a co-op, but it's the idea that a bunch of farmers get together,
Yep.
and you get the maximum income out of it, so that you're not giving it away to a third party. That you're actually getting together and providing kind of safety in numbers, which I think has. Is a pretty interesting model.
And led by farmers, and sort of still, it's I say farmer owned, but it's not relying on too many external people
Players.
and factors and players who probably just jump in going, well, there's a bit of coin in this. Now tell me, I pulled a quote from somewhere, Gabby, and farmers' problems are eaters' problems. Talk to me about that. Because we haven't talked about eaters much, have we?
No. And one of the conversations that alerted me to this was a guy called Mike Lee in the US, and he's a food futurist, which is an interesting profession.
Futurists. Are they like wizards who
They're
just...
kind of crystal balling about what happens with food. And
Cool.
And he was talking about food tribes and how increasingly what we eat signals our identity. So when we were teenagers, we would have determined our identity, what we were wearing or what music we were listening to, and increasingly younger generations, like my kids' age, 22, my son's got, very clear about what he eats and the reason he eats it and values, and I think that's a really interesting trend for farmers to be aware of, and even that, the idea of regenerative farming. You're seeing, I interviewed Vince Heffernan in the book. He's a lamb grower in Dalton, just out of Canberra. He sends his lamb to Feather and Bone, a butcher in Sydney, and they are creating, a product where they can tell the story of the food, where it comes from, and people are paying a premium for it. So, eaters are choosing to put, or not, their money where their mouth is, and the idea that, what a farmer does is separate to, the food ingested by the eater, I think, is no longer, it just doesn't wash, right? It's this became clear to me when I was covering, in the drought, when I was covering the water debate. So the water management, the water market, the idea in Australia where you buy and sell water, it's just like any other thing.
Commodity.
And people were saying, those bloody irrigators, they shouldn't be allowed to do what they do, and then they're eating their produce from the supermarket. Like, how does that work? You can't be eating the product, like scoffing down your almonds and complaining about almond growers.
Oh, and your almond latte, mocha, chai.
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Yeah.
I love them.
So that disconnection, I think, really was one of the driving forces for the book as well, because it was this I wanted to put paid to that idea that farmers exist in this separate universe that is separate to me as an eater, and that what they do has nothing to do with me. Like, I can have feelings about what they do, but I can't disconnect myself from what they do.
And I guess they can, in sourcing and finding, demanding that food, they can be contributing in a positive way to solving a problem or problems back at the farm somehow. I guess the more hands in between, the harder that is.
It is, and I think that's why you've seen the rise in businesses like Feather and Bone that kind of bring the story of the food. Farmers markets are a classic for that sort of thing. There's an increase in buy-in, but whenever I start talking about this, and particularly when I talk to economists or agronomists or people really involved in kind of supply chains, they say, well, you know, there is a cohort of the population that can't afford it. And what do you do about them? And I would say somewhere down the food production chain, either the farmer or the environment or the eater or the government has to pay. So there is a cost of food produced, and there's a cost in dollar terms, in production terms. There's also a cost in environmental terms. And if we're saying that we can't afford for food growers to charge the full cost of what it takes to produce the steak on your plate, well, you're either saying, okay, I can't afford it, but I want the farmer to pay for it, or I can't afford it and I want the environment to pay for it. And at the same time, we're saying, what are we going to do to save the environment?
Yeah.
So,
you know, I think there's also, just to add to that too, and I've said it before, but and I'd actually love to do the maths on it. I think it's been done. But the theory, not so much a theory, but the concept of when someone's saying, I can't afford, I'm not saying that anyone's, you know, I'm not being judgmental. If that's what they feel, then that's absolutely fine. I would just sort of suggest, okay, if the belief is, or that the experience is that that good food, let's just call it, you know, more nutritiously dense food, doesn't have to be organic, but just a better type of food, is more expensive and is unaffordable, then I think I would suggest looking at the rest of the shopping trolley might help steer that conversation to a place that might be a better place. You know, what else is in the shopping trolley? So, okay, you want to put in the good stuff, the good fresh food, grass-fed meat, maybe not feedlot meat, whatever. But what else is in there? You know, what other processed food which is not contributing to the environment in a good way, or your own health? What can we take out to offset that? You know, what are the empty carbs? What's the cheap food? What's the food that's often even more environmentally criminal than, you know, the two types of tomatoes? You know, the conventionally grown one and the organic one. I don't know. I just think that it's a bigger conversation, I think, than just, you know, fresh food is more expensive or organic food is more expensive. And look, everyone has their own situation and so on. I guess it's really just a suggestion, I reckon.
and I always bring it back to policy. So what is a policy that would serve that? And that is around transparency of nutritional value that could be on a shelf, on the price tag, and to give people a way of comparing, because there's so much messy information when you hit a supermarket and you're hitting it after work and you're trying to get dinner on the table for the kids. So making those calculations easily, I think, is kind of half the battle. There will always be a cohort who can't afford food non-stop, you know, like full stop. But making those decisions easier is all about transparency, and I think often big food industries don't like to make it transparent.
No, because that sort of, you know, shines a light on whether it's nutrition or it's chemical load or it's the treatment of the animals involved or whatever, and that can be a little inconvenient at times, And there's minutes away from apps being available to scan, and nutrition, chemical load. I don't think we're that far away, and that'll be a game changer. Talking about game changing, what opportunities do you think there are for farmers to I don't know whether it's changing their business model or do a better job? Again, what's the definition of better? What opportunities are there out there for farmers economically or socially, culturally, that you've identified in your book as the little pitter-patter of rain falls down?
Yes, exactly. We could get rained out here. I would say, again, it comes back to that transparency level. It's finding ways to help farmers, and my thing is always that kind of middle group of farmers that I'm thinking about, that are either in between, commodity growers, but in between the big and the very small. And it's about, making models that are easier for them, because often they're doing so much. Like, this is turning into such a complex business, isn't it? The farming business. You've got to be across so many things, particularly in a mixed farm where you're trying to get the crop in, and you're trying to keep the animals going, and you're trying to stay across, markets and forward selling and all of that stuff.
And there's a whole lot of tech that's sort of turning up,
I'll see you over there, Gabby. Pete wants me to do a little bit of...
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
You may have her now. I'm not allowed to say your name.
15 minutes early because he's showing me a piece of machinery. So,
okay.
So you've got another 15 minutes.
That sounds... Can I come along? That sounds interesting. See you, farmer. There's a whole multiple layers of expertise that we feel we must be all over, and I guess we've always been jack of all trades. Plumbers and sparkies and vets and...
Well, that's it. I mean, that's the thing that really shocked me about farming, is that I came into it thinking that it was a kind of quite a simple business, not simple as in simpleton, but simple as in straightforward. Like, you grow crops, there's a couple of sheep in the paddock, it rains or it doesn't, no biggie. And I've realised how very complex it is, and that requires incredible talent and incredible dedication to do all of those things at the same time.
And I think, and that's just what happens within the farm gate. I mean, there's obviously phone calls to other people outside your farm, and there's agents and whatever else, but it's all related to what's happening generally within the boundary of your farm. And then you sort of add in you sort of throw on the table the opportunity to value add or market your produce in a different way, as opposed to whizzing it down the road to the local yards and selling it and that sort of thing. And that's like, oh my God. And for people to get their head around that opportunity, that's a whole nother skill set that one might feel they have to or want to get a handle on. Like, okay, I've got to take my video around and video me farming, or got to create a brand, or I've got to talk to some butchers in Sydney, or which I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think that's where a lot of value can be left or come back to the farm. But it's just another whole another additional challenge.
And that stuff I find really interesting, because that also comes back to personality and desire, I guess. So what you've done in creating your brand would not suit the farmer or people who are less what would I call it?
Willing to do it.
Yeah, willing to put themselves out there, because in some ways it's a very interior profession. You spend a lot of time in your own head, and so if you're not a more extroverted person, the idea of selling a brand is really scary to some people, and just not something they want to do. And Vince Heffernan, the lamb grower at Dalton, said to me, it really makes me confused that farmers, there's no one like farmers who are happy to throw their hands up when their produce leaves the farm gate. They don't seem to care where it goes to or who consumes it, because they're kind of on to the next lambing
like,
or on to the next harvest. It's gone,
yeah.
and I can go through the cycle again. Whereas increasing that portion past the farm gate is a really important factor, and something that you can make money out of.
Totally. It is another skill set, and it is, it's, and I think Vince is doing a wonderful job. He's won awards at the Delicious Food Awards. His personality is suited to that. He can be a bit gruff sometimes. Did you find that? Vince won't listen to this anyway, so.
I wouldn't call him gruff.
You were saying before we put the thing on. You were saying he's so gruff.
I was not.
No, Vince.
We love you, Vince. We love you.
He does do a good lamb though.
He does do
more
a good
lambs,
lamb.
biodynamic lamb. I'm going to interview Vince when I can. Last time I tried to track him out, which was a while ago, he was down at the coast. He sent me pictures of him like sitting on the beach or near the. It's like, I don't care where you are. Just when you're at the farm, I need to talk to you.
So at the point, I just want to make another point about what he said, which was really interesting to me. So of the regen farmers, the so-called regen farmers that I've met, they often go into it for environmental reasons or animal welfare reasons. And Vince, I think, was one of the ones that said to me, I just looked at this economic model and thought, this is, just not working for me.
When you say this one, as in his previous model or the conventional model?
His previous model, which was, a very conventional model. He's a 6th generation farmer. He was saying, I felt like I was getting screwed by the supermarkets. I wasn't happy with it, and he goes to his agent and says, I want to do this in a different way, and his agent says, well, find another agent.
You weirdo.
Basically, exactly. But so that was really interesting to me, that, that was the economic thing that pushed him on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty sensible place to start, isn't it? Because you're right, a lot of people, and I have to say I was guilty of probably looking at the environment side of it. I mean, I guess everyone has their own reason. No, not. Well, I guess. I mean, we all have our own motivations, and there was equal. I don't know if it's equal portions, but it was certainly a number. It wasn't just like, oh, my trees are dying, we'll do something about it, or my soil's blowing away. There are economic considerations, social, the whole thing. So it can be challenging. Talking about that, given your research, what are there paradigms? Are there any particular paradigms or general paradigms that, for people to change, do a better job, whatever again that looks like? Are there any sort of paradigms you think that farmers have to or should get over?
I think the last decade or so, the last 2 decades actually, have been about productivity, really productivity focused. And I think the next couple of decades is going to be all about the environment, all about your landscape, all about your animal welfare. Like, I don't think farmers can escape that. There's very terse discussions, particularly on social media, around the use of chemicals. We're seeing legal cases around glyphosate, Roundup, and farmers say to me that, that can't change. It's going to change the whole way we do things. Well, like the weather, like the climate, like the economic model, these things are going to come whether you like it or not. And I think preparing for those eventualities is just sensible, because the consumers, the eaters, are really changing the way they think of things. And as we're going into the COP talks in Glasgow, as Europe is going to start changing the rules about what's imported into their borders, what the the environmental value in your landscape is, what you're putting back. I think all of those things are pushing us in that more environmentally minded direction. So people can dig their heels in, they can kick and scream, but it's changing. It's changing. I did a sort of carbon accounting workshop, I guess it was, through Landcare, and where you try and measure your emissions and all that sort of stuff. I think that's coming at us so fast, and to resist, as they say, to resist is futile. But the important part of that is you've got to be at the table to explain the farming systems and the way they work. Meat is one example where it's not a simple black and white, eat meat, don't eat meat. I think these are very nuanced conversations, very complex conversations that farmers have to be involved in. Otherwise, it's designed by someone else without that input and without that very intimate landscape knowledge. And so for me, like, that book is about, trying to switch farmers on to that conversation, that, the policy debates that are happening now. The policy debates are actually happening in Parliament this week, and have been for a long time, and will be for the coming months. Like, those actual policy debates. How do you sequester soil carbon? Should farmers be paid for carbon and biodiversity? All of these things are happening in Parliament House, in the chamber, this week, right now.
How? Because I often, discuss with people the pros and cons of, where one as an individual farmer, family, community, industry, where we could put our focus. And my sense is a lot of people think, oh, government, like, that's a bloody slog. Let's just get on and do it. Let's create the carbon platform or whatever it is. Let's just go and change, try these different practices. Let's create our own markets. And it's a on the ground led revolution. So is that something you feel is right, or you get a sense of from other people, or do you think there's a real go forward opportunity by engaging with politicians and in helping inform policy and change legislation?
I guess what I would say is similar to the farmers that like to go out and sell their product, compared with the farmers that are more introverted and are happy to deal, behind the farm gate. It's the same in politics, right? So there are people, farmers who want to go and design their whole new ways of looking after landscape, new ways of growing food, and they're doing it on the outside of Parliament, they're doing it on the outside of the political system, or they're entering into partnerships with private companies. We've seen, payments for soil carbon, for example, with Wilmot Station and Cavan, with the payments coming out of the Microsoft Climate Fund. So that's an example of where people are doing it on the outside, getting together with another private company and doing that. But I think there's a really important piece for farmers getting involved in the conversation at a political level, because politics designs legislation and regulation. And that design, for example, there's a carbon and biodiversity pilot scheme that pays farmers right now. That's going to determine what the policy is going forward. So if you're politically inclined, you might be thinking about, how am I going to engage with this? How am I going to get my views across to politicians? What would a good system look like? What would a fair system look like? Because we've all discovered, basically, that even though farming culture is often, farmers often think of themselves as the lord of their domain within their boundary fences, what farmers do on their farms has an effect outside the boundary fence, right? It has an effect on eaters, has an effect on the environment. And so there has to be this kind of, I think, a new social contract between eaters and farmers about how that affects those effects flow both from the farm outside into the broader environment, but also the eaters, you know, what they're paying, who they're encouraging back inside the fence.
Was there ever an old social contract?
There was, in Australian terms, there was a social contract in that, you know, protection of agriculture, which was basically, price setting, all of that stuff. That worked
well, didn't it?
That was essentially a social contract that says we value what we do, what you do, and it was more about government saying we need to encourage lots of exports in the early part of the colonial history to send back to Mother England so that they've got lots of wheat and lots of lamb chops.
And so that how do we write that new social contract? What needs to happen? Who are the players? Who's doing the copy? Who's putting this down?
I wrote a book. That was my contribution.
So it's quite a lengthy document then.
It's quite a document. I damn near did my head in, I can tell you. No, seriously, you pull it was meant to be a simple story. You pull a thread of a farm and you kind of work out what system it is. But farming, I think, gets to really deep philosophical debates pretty quickly about the way you want to organise society, how you value food, how you value looking after landscape. Like, these are really kind of deep fundamental things, and you can see it's done differently in different places. In Europe, the Common Agricultural Policy is the biggest expense in the European Parliament.
Even the subsidising and we'll pay you not to grow that stuff.
Yeah, or we'll pay you to grow stuff. We'll pay you whether you're making money or not, because we either value the food or we like the tourists going through the little villages and seeing all the little, you know,
lammies
and the canola fields. These are conscious decisions that governments make. The US has the US Farm Bill. That links together food and farming and is essentially a production subsidy. So all of these governments are trying to work out how to do this.
That's a hard thing to unwind, isn't it?
The production subsidy, or the way that governments do it?
Well, both. I mean, the governments have set it up. Whether the cockies or the farmers were, demanded it, or it was just like, oh, that's a good idea. Let's do this for the farmers. But there's an entrenched attitude, I imagine, to that now, and for the government to turn around and go, hey, I'm going to pay you half what I used to, just like that, or just like big changes to that system would be challenging.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, as the UK's come out, or Britain's come out of Brexit, they are changing their system so that they will no longer pay a production subsidy as they did when they were part of the EU, but they will pay based on environmental services.
So that it's a pivot.
It's an absolute pivot.
Oh, that's good.
And I interviewed Dieter Helm, who's head of the UK Natural Capital Commission, about this, and he said it is like the biggest fundamental change in that country when it comes to farming, because it's used to be paid on production based on how much land you had. So that kind of entrenches the system and the ownership, and you start to pivot and pay for environmental services, and then suddenly, it's not the biggest farmer, it's the farmer that's doing things
the betterer farmer
that is better for the environment.
Let's jump back to eaters. What did I read here? Oh, that's it. What if the eaters sort of ignore the trend we're seeing of or the opportunity they have to engage more directly with farmers, whether it's through food or going to a farm, or that engagement, which I just think is a wonderfully healthy thing to do, especially for your kids. What are the consequences of just the status quo for a lot of people, just ignoring that as an opportunity are they going to be like left behind? Is health like even more rapidly declining? Is it sort of the pulling apart of the urban social, the cultural thing? I mean, food's got a really reasonably important role to play in culture, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's a big part of culture. Food, I mean, I thought deeply about this. Food is so incidental now, like it's just everywhere, isn't it? It's just like drive-through coffee, it can be fantastic and it can be shit. And I think the danger is if we don't bridge that divide between farmers and eaters, that you get political disruption over the way, and we've seen that this week over the carbon debates and whether we're in or not, and we've seen a lot of silly political debate, but it does create these divides in societies that are not healthy, and we saw that with Brexit. We saw it with Donald Trump in America, the division between people in regional areas and people in metropolitan areas. And it does have an effect on the health of food, the food that we want to encourage, good food, shorter supply chains. I don't think we can just chuck out long global supply chains completely, because I think the world does have a responsibility to feed countries who can't feed themselves. But I think that if the lockdown taught us anything, it's that we need the short and the medium supply chains too for food, so that people can get good local stuff. I mean, our local town here, all of the towns around here had a mill. It used to have a wheat mill, and in the middle of the lockdown, we couldn't get flour. We're on a wheat farm, and there's a old rundown mill in town that's not working because of competition policy, because another big company swallowed it up and shut it down so that it wasn't competition.
Not unlike abattoirs. Every town had an abattoir.
Exactly. And you saw what happened, particularly in America. The abattoirs in America were, once they shut down, everyone started panicking because there were only big concentrated abattoirs rather than the smaller ones dotted around the countryside. So you get an infection in one abattoir, and it cuts down the supply chain to great big areas rather than just one little town.
It's not a good recipe for resilience, is it?
It's not. No. It's not. It's like diversity. It's like farming itself. To rely on any one thing, to have all your eggs in one basket, is just not a smart strategy.
Yeah, I think diversity is reasonably important. That does remind me when I was involved with farming advisory as a client, organisation, and one of the things that was drummed into us from an economic and a business model point of view, they used to call diversity.
Oh, really?
Because there's a point at which I think you can have too many enterprises on a farm, and it sort of just takes away from the focus of a few. But I always remember, it's just not diversity is king. Just make sure you don't end up in the world of diversity. I'm conscious of time. You have to go and implement. You're running late for your machine inspection. Very quick one. Anything you're particularly irate about right now?
Oh, God. I'm irate about so many things. I'm one of those people that yells at televisions, the television news. You
don't have to watch it. You don't have to watch it.
I do, because I'm a journalist, right? I'm a journalist. I can't help it.
What are you raging when you're yelling at the TV? What's on it?
I'm yelling at the sort of dumb policy debate around climate change. The idea that farmers, even want to step outside of climate debates. I think farmers are so essential. And land managers, Indigenous land managers, Indigenous farmers are so essential to how we go forward and solve the climate issues that we're facing. And it's not that, I don't think, from the science that I've seen and the research I've seen, farmers are never going to solve anything. And why should they solve everything, right? Farmers are never going to solve everything. they can't solve everything, but I think, you know, they have a pivotal role in how we're going to negotiate these big climate debates going forward, how we're going to negotiate, you know, getting good, healthy, reasonably priced food. All of these issues are really pivotal issues for me, and when I see these dumb debates about, you know, in the federal parliament, oh God, I can't even think of an example now, but you know, it's ridiculous and it's simplistic to think that farmers don't care about these things.
Just about that, I mean, why don't politicians, I mean, is it fair to say they just don't get, a lot of them just don't get it? Like, do they get it, but they just like, oh, it's not party policy, so I can't speak out, or there's other agendas at play, or they just don't think, oh, farmers, like, you know, food, like, how's that going to save the planet?
Well, you know, I think part of it is farming is quite, you know, in political terms, farming is apparently a small constituency now in terms. So the traditional parties like the National Party, Matt Canavan said, you know, like he's a former mining minister, he thinks mining is, you know, dare I say it, more important and
Than farming.
Well, yeah, he said, you know, farmers are a small percentage of our constituency now, so, you know, no biggie if you know, we're not sort of doing things that farmers might necessarily want. I just think it's just, it doesn't truly reflect the part that farming plays in a lot of these country towns. You know, it's an important kind of cultural piece. Farming is obviously an important landscape piece. Farmers manage more than half of Australia's landscape. Like, that's a big chunk of a big country.
Isn't it interesting? So a big chunk of a big country, small constituency, like, you know, don't matter too much. Even though, whoa, hang on, more than half under management, influential decision making on those, dare I say, resources that I trust are being used usefully. Time. One last question. You've got the opportunity to put a billboard. I've actually got a billboard ready to go on the Hume Highway, just down there at Dugong.
Really?
I'm lying. But if I did, and you could put a phrase, quote, question, whatever, what would it be? You had the opportunity to influence how travellers thought while they read that sign till they got to the next bit.
I can't decide. It's the food.
You can have front and back. You can have two. You can have the front and the back.
So, okay, on the front I would put, it's the food stupid. And on the back I'd put, it's the land stupid.
Cool.
Because I think those two things are critical to our future going into 2050.
Awesome. Gabby, I must let you go. That is wonderful. Where can people find why you should give a fuck about farming?
Oh, we said it.
No, I do. I swear often. I just wanted you to feel uncomfortable saying it.
You can find it at all good bookstores online.
Yeah, anywhere in particular? Is there anyone you want to give a plug to and go to that bookshop?
Local bookshops.
Or just go to your local bookshop maybe and ask for it.
Just go to your local. I'd prefer if you supported your local bookshop so that they can sell books from writers like me and my friends.
And Charles Massey, Mr. Massey says everything a potential game-changing book should be.
Yes.
What a lovely fella.
He's a very kind man.
Oh, he's probably being very honest. He's kind and honest.
I was terrified when I sent it to him to read.
Were you?
Yeah.
Has he had an influence on you?
Yeah, he has. Like, he's a really courageous bloke.
Totally.
You know, his book, Call of the Reed Warbler, and the SRS book, you know, the War book beforehand, He's someone, I think actually he might have a little bit of oppositional defiance disorder himself. Dare I say it?
But he doesn't. But he does it in such a nice
Such a
way.
nice
Such a gentle. I know. Yeah.
Can I just tell you
Don't pump his tires up too much. He doesn't need it.
I've just got to tell you one thing. My first Writers' Festival that I did for Rusted Off, and I was on with Charlie. And
You meant on the stage with him, like a panelly thing?
Yeah,
cool.
And we were signing books afterwards, and this lady came up to me afterwards and said, "Do you know if Charlie's married?"
That old silver fox. Yeah, and what did you say?
I said, "Yes, he is married."
Oh, you had the perfect opportunity to wind him right up there, or have him get into trouble. That's a classic. Oh, he's a tall, good-looking man.
I know. I could see the
He's
whole
Charles.
audience was in love with him.
Swooning. No, well, I just love his articulation, and he's such a sincere, not earnest. He can be at times, but that's a good thing. But he's just such a lovely. I'd interviewed him down at his place at Seven Park there at Cooma last year, and that's right. Just very quickly, I rang him. He texted me at about 6 in the morning because I had to get up and get down there and make sure it was all. And he said, "Oh, I've had a sniffle all night. I might have got something from the kids." It was like, July last year, so it was the middle of the COVID show. And he went, "Oh, it might be best we don't do it." And I lay there for 5 minutes and said, "I can't believe it." And I just said, "Charlie, I don't care. I'm coming."
I'll get
and he went, and I don't care. This is too much of an opportunity because it had taken a bit of dancing around to get to that organiser. So glad I did. So glad I came over here today because Burrawa and Hanamino is not far away. It's just over those hills back over that way.
Yeah.
And I've so enjoyed our little chat, and the birds have too. Little blue wrens.
Yeah, lots of blue wrens.
Awesome. And the rain has just stayed
Held off,
away.
yeah.
But I know you need to get to your next engagement, and I'm going to get you to sign my book before we go, talking about book signings. And thank you so much, Gabrielle. Thank you for sharing your regenerative journey and your thoughts on the world.
Thanks very much, Charlie. I loved it.
Good. Good. You better have. After all that.
It was
Thanks,
really
Gabby.
good. It was really good.